Thank you for having me here. I thought about just coming up here and just say whatever Tom Pauken said, and some others said just ditto. But I'll try and give you a little bit of perspective. Commit is a regional partnership that we formed in the last 8 or 9 months to effectively bring together superintendents, college presidents, early childhood providers, foundations, the business community, to try and figure out where the leaks in the educational pipeline are and how do we best direct our resources to try and solve them. And we're measuring effectively Dallas County is what we're trying to serve. And one of the missions that we had when we first formed our group was, what are we going to measure? How are we going to tell ourselves and the community at large that we're making progress? And so as many of you know, due to this testing system, we have a tremendous amount of data. We have more data than we know what to do with, but as I like to say, we're data rich and we're information poor. And for me, for accountability to work, it needs to measure what matters. It needs to be clear and easily understandable and easily accessible. And it needs to help convey in a transparent manner to those who have a vested stake in the results. So in my mind, that's parents, that's the business community, and the workforce community at large. So let me talk about my perceptions of the accountability system as a relative layman. I've been on a school board for 9 years. I've been on a college board for 12, but I'm not a professional educator. So let me just give you a sense from a business perspective who came at this. So in taking those ideas I talked about, our accountability system is very hard to access. You have to know, // dot whatever to get to a site to find out how a school is doing. You can get 11 pages of single space, small font print that will tell you all sorts of things, sort of stratified by subpops, etc. But there's no real, it's just incredibly hard and difficult to maneuver if you're a parent just trying to figure out where should I live? What schools are best? How do I figure this out? And then it takes all that information and tries to condense in one word: exemplary, recognized, acceptable or unacceptable, what kind of school that is and what's going on within those walls. And that's very hard to do. And so when I started thinking about, does it really measure what matters, I really dug into this a little bit because I'm a data guy, I'm a financial guy, 20 years of my life. There's 8,000 schools across Texas. In 2010-11, 93% of those schools were rated acceptable, recognized, or exemplary. 86% of our senior high schools carried those same ratings. And yet we have a state where 27% of our kids graduate, who start in 9th grade, graduate 4 years later with a college or career-ready SAT or ACT score. That doesn't make sense to me. And then I think about the fact that, because we were thinking about how much did the goalposts get moved. And when I looked at 2007 and 2008, 54% of our schools were ranked exemplary or recognized. Magically, 1 year later, 70%, and then magically a year later, 80%, because they instituted this thing called TPM. And then they took it away, and we went back down to 54%. So if you're trying to figure out as a parent or as a business person or how good is the quality of your schools, to have that kind of jumping up and down makes no sense either, again, if you believe in an accountability system that works. In Dallas County, we have 81% of our schools graduate high school. Yet we have 50% graduation rates in our 4-year colleges and our 2-year colleges. And that is in my opinion, schools, kids have not been sufficiently engaged. They have not sufficiently learned. I agree with a lot of the comments that were made prior to me coming up here in terms of developing critical thinking, developing a love for learning, developing all the things. We've lost a lot of that. And as a result, kids are being pushed along and they're not prepared. And it's showing up in terms of their ability to graduate with some type of vocational certificate, 2-year degree, or 4-year degree. And then the other thing that just drove me crazy about our accountability system was when I looked at the quality. Most school ratings are based historically on passing rates, on tax tests. And so when I looked at the data and I hired a statistician to look at the information, and magically, effectively, 80 to 82, 83% of kids, regardless of the test, regardless of the subject, were passing the test. And I said, how can we have such a narrow band that consistently the same number passes the test statewide? And then what you go in, you find out is that to pass a 9th grade math test, 54% of the questions means you pass. In my home, if my son came home with a math test and he passed 54% of the questions, that'd be an F. 10th grade reading, 59%. To pass 11th grade science, 53%. And to pass an 11th grade social studies test, 44% of the questions right means you pass. And then you say, why can't the kids learn when they go to college? So I just think that if we're going to come up with any accountability system, it means to mean something. It needs to make sure that it does no harm, that it doesn't affect kids' ability and love for learning. It needs to be understandable, clear, and transparent. And I'll wrap up by saying one of the things I think about is public schools obviously compete with private schools. And you think about also in higher ed, you've got public and private. So any child can go to a public school, public college, or a private college, big school, small school, out of state, in state. They have a lot of choice. And when I think about when you go, if you're a parent and you're fortunate to be able to send your child to a private school, you go there and you don't ask for third grade standardized test scores. You effectively want to know, do your kids graduate? If so, what sort of scores do they get on their standardized tests in terms of SAT or ACT? Where do they get accepted into college or into community college or vocational? You ask for outcomes. Same thing when you go to college. You basically, do they graduate from college? Do they have a job when they graduate within 6 months of when they leave? What's their acceptance rates in graduate school? You focus on outcomes. You don't basically try and micromanage all the steps along the way to there, because you empower the educators to do that, because they know ultimately they're going to be held accountable for those outcomes. I don't know why we don't do more of that within the public school system. And so I'll just finish up by basically saying that I believe strongly in empowering educators locally. I believe that we have to have accountability. I think we've gone way too far, as has already been mentioned, and I believe that we ought to have some key outcomes. We should measure them. And equally important, I think parents need to truly understand whatever it is we're measuring in a very clear and transparent and fashionable way, because ultimately they're the primary decision maker for whether or not where their kids should go to school. And I'll wrap that up. Thank you.